Hey folks, Jamie here. Thank you for tuning in. Before we get started, I would like for you to take a moment and go down below and hit the like and subscribe buttons. Maybe leave a comment. If you're really feeling generous, maybe share this video to your social media feeds. What that does is make it a lot easier for other people to find a Moment of Tiki. I really appreciate it and it helps out a lot. Thanks. Now, on with the show. Welcome to another episode of the Moment of Tiki, coming to you from the Lagoon of Mystery, my home tiki bar here in Central Texas. Some of you who have been watching for a while may be aware of the fact that in addition to the Lagoon of Mystery, I am working on an interior tiki space for those times when inclement weather makes it uncomfortable to be out here. We're talking winter. I know Texas doesn't get a whole lot of winter, but when we do, it can be kind of nasty. So I've been working on this for a couple of years, and I've been going very slowly, as is with all my projects, simply because I only add to it when I have a little bit of extra cash. But at this point, I have reached a milestone of sorts. When I built Lagoon of Mystery, I put on the walls woven bamboo panels. I have never worked with Lauhala. I figured the bamboo would last better out here exposed to the elements even indirectly. So I skipped the Lauhala. This time I wanted a different look for my interior space. So I went with Lauhala matting for my wall covers. And I have to say, Lauhala is a different experience from working with the woven bamboo. So if you want to come along with me and see the lessons I learned as I learned them, by all means, you're welcome to ride along. Let's go. Lauhala matting is just about the most popular wall covering for tiki spaces, whether it's a tiki bar, tiki restaurant, tiki lounge. It's by far the most popular. I've never worked with it before. I've heard it can be challenging because the edges aren't always square. They can be irregular, not quite matching up, but we're going to try our hand and see what happens. I used woven bamboo matting for Lagoon of Mystery outdoors because that is a more durable material, at least to my thinking. But for this inside space I'm working on, I've got 50-foot roll of Lauhala matting, and we're going to cut it and slice it and paste it up there and see how much of this wall we can get covered with it. If I were installing the Lauhala matting along this wall, it would be pretty easy and straightforward. I just have to cut it off square and attach it and work my way down the wall. That's not going to happen because I have different plans for this wall. Lauhala matting is going to go here, which complicates things a little because it goes up to this pony wall and then we have a 45-degree angle. So I'm going to have to cut the Lauhala matting fit in here. How am I going to do that and stay accurate? Well, there's probably a lot of ways you can do it, measuring and stuff, but I'm going to use my trusty butcher paper and lay out a template. Placing the butcher paper along the lines that I need to recreate the angle. I'm using glue tape. Make it into position. Now don't be mistaken. I am going to measure all this out as well, just be doubly sure that everything is correct. But thus far, I'm using this to make sure that the angle is correct. Okay, gang, I screwed up. Somehow I lost about a day's worth of video footage. So I'm going to recreate a little bit right here so you can kind of be caught up and brought back to speed. It's my butcher paper template. I laid it on the Lauhala matting. And I used a Sharpie to mark the cut lines. Okay, so this part right here comes off and conforms to the angle of the ceiling. Then I used a pair of tin snips to cut the Lauhala. Lauhala isn't very strong, it's not tough, so you probably get away with regular scissors, but these heavy duty things made the job fairly quick work. Now, because the Lauhala is woven, there's no glue or anything involved, as I was cutting, I realized it was coming unraveled. So what I did, I went back and applied duct tape to the backside where I was cutting. And so as I cut along, the duct tape would hold the Lauhala pieces in place so it didn't start unraveling. Otherwise, each one of these will start peeling away and you'll get strips flaking out. It's like this right here. This entire side is coming apart because I didn't tape it. Once all the cuts were made and I had it measured and properly sized, I placed it up on the wall and used little small wire nails to tap it in along the edges, nail it in where there were studs, either studs along the frame of the roof line or individual studs through the wall. I used a stud finder to find those, and at the edges I tapped them in and held the Lauhala in place with those fine nails. Many people use staples all over the place to hold Lauhala up. You know me, I kind of have an aversion to staples. They're useful on occasion. For this case though, I knew I was going to have additional supports to hold Lauhala in place, which we'll get to shortly. So all I needed were those nails to hold it in place temporarily until I had a more permanent solution in place. So we'll get to that shortly, but nails along the edges, additional supports coming in shortly. To locate the wall socket to cut on the Lauhala matting, take a piece of duct tape, add a little loop of blue painter's tape, place it on the socket, and bring down the Lauhala. After I pull it off, I lay additional pieces of duct tape over that to stabilize this. Now I'll be able to cut through without everything unraveling. I'm using a very sharp knife, in this case a wood carving knife, to cut a hole through the Lauhala to expose the wall outlet. Doing so, I use my fingers by touch to find the outlines of the single gang box that is holding the wall outlet, and using the rigid frame of the box, slicing through with the knife. When you do this, just absolutely make sure you have the breaker turned off at the source so you don't accidentally electrocute yourself. Since we have the wall outlet disassembled, now's our opportunity to do things right if we're going to do them at all. In this case, replacing the bright white wall outlet and plate cover with dark brown versions, brown or black. Anything that's much darker is going to blend in better with the ambiance of the tiki room. Take your outlet, and if you need to take pictures of the previous wiring, do so, but just reinstall it exactly the way it was when you removed the original white outlet. But the one thing I have to stress is safety, safety, safety. Before you try to do this, be absolutely 100% certain that the power is turned off at the breaker box. So double check that and you're golden. This is the part where I actually planned ahead. Way back when I installed these baseboards, a couple of years ago now, I always intended to do so with the plan to tuck the edge of the Lauhala matting behind them. So it creates a clean, seamless interface. Like so. Unfortunately, unlike my memory, I did not use screws to attach the baseboard to the wall. I don't know why I didn't. That was my plan all along. Screw these into the wall so that I could easily remove it. Had I done so, my work would have gone a lot easier and a lot more smoothly, but instead, for some reason, I nailed it onto the wall, which was a lot more time consuming and challenging to take off the wall without damaging everything beyond use. So, learn from my mistakes. If you are going to have your baseboards or your molding or anything else that's attached to the wall need to come off at some point in the future, use screws, which I'm going to rectify now. You want to take your stud finder, and this will work through the Lauhala matting, through the drywall. Find where your stud is. Oh, right here in line with the outlet. Take a bit of tape, masking tape or blue tape will work in a pinch, so you know where it is. Your drill for pilot hole. I like to drill my pilot holes in the routed triangle slots because it's more easy to disguise that way. Drill a quick pilot hole. Your screw. I'm using 1 5/8" long interior screws, which should be more than enough to penetrate the wood and the drywall and into the stud behind the wall to secure this firmly in place. And there we have it. This is the part where things start to get a little complicated. The angled wall ceiling, that was just child's play right here. Because now I get to fill in these two sides. Measure right here. It's 24 inches, 2 feet. And over here is 25 inches, a little more than 2 feet, which under normal circumstances with normal paneling would be pretty easy. Just split the 4x8 sheet right down the middle. We're not dealing with normal paneling. We're dealing with Lauhala. I am quickly learning why people who build tiki bars complain about Lauhala so much. It is a natural product. As far as I know, it is hand woven And because of that, it does not have the tolerances of, say, plywood, where you have your parallel sides, and it's always cut in exactly 4x8 sheets. This is ostensibly 4 feet wide, however long it is, but the sides can weave in, move from one side to the other. On this particular mat, as I'm looking at it right here, it is curving. It is curving almost like a crescent the way it was made. For the most part, that's not a big deal with an individual placement on the walls. I can pull it because it's not terribly tightly woven. You can stretch it and work it around so it will go where you need it to. Except right now, I need to split it down the middle. And looking at this right here, this particular section is 4 feet 3 inches across. Now there are other parts in here where it gets narrower, and it's narrower than 4 feet. So using the T-square to find the exact center is not going to be terribly efficient, because if I follow the edge, finding the center, we're going to have a wavy line going down the middle, and that's going to wreak havoc. So I'm going to have to figure out the general center of it as opposed to finding the 4 foot mark, and go from there. And then cut it, and that's going to be an adventure, because now we're starting to get the natural tendencies of the Lauhala to shift and move around are starting to affect our measurements. So a lot of guesswork and finger crossing going forward. I use a T-square and a straight edge to measure out the center of the Lauhala matting, mark it, go over it with duct tape to keep it from unraveling as I cut, and then I use a pair of tin snips to cut right down the center on all my carefully measured lines. The properly sized Lauhala pieces are positioned on the wall, where I use wire nails to secure them in place. On this section of the wall, I had several anchored screws to support a window piece and some shelving. So rather than take those out and try to re-anchor them, they're protruding and I can feel them through the Lauhala. So what I'm going to do is take this carving knife and slice just an X right in the middle, right where that bump was, where I felt it, and push it right through. The pieces of Lauhala fold back over there, and I've got the wall anchored screw protruding through the Lauhala, ready for me to mount things back on there without having to re-drill everything. For the trim pieces, I am using 3-inch pine, just simple, cheap pine boards from the store. They're an inch thick, 3 inches wide, 8 foot long. Lumber prices are crazy, but they are coming down a little bit from the heights of the pandemic. And I've found that pine, the softwood pine with its wide growth rings and dramatic character, is probably the best for the torch and burn approach for the trim pieces, the wall molding along the top that I'm going to use it for. It takes the flame very well, takes stain very well. It just gives a lot of texture once you're through. If you watch my previous episode where I made the baseboards for this indoor tiki room, you know I used a triangle pattern routed into the wood. I've used this pattern throughout the Lagoon of Mystery, and frankly it looks good, but I am sick and tired of triangles. So for the interior trim, what I want to do is try something I've been fascinated with for a long time, tiki spiral designs. I think they look fantastic, but I do not trust myself with these to do it freehand. So what I did was create a template using a piece of cardstock cut to the same width as a board. What I did was draw freehand a spiral on here. I made a square and quartered it so I could keep everything roughly in proportion. Once I had all the marks in place, I took a sharp knife and cut through all of the markings. That way I can use this as a template. I place it on the wood, place the pencil in the cut holes, and then go through it multiple times, back and forth, until I have a suitable pattern drawn on the wood. Now, this is more of a guide than a hard and fast pattern to follow. Basically, it's to keep the circles, the whorls, the spirals in proportion. So we don't have some that are bunched up, some that are spread out, some that are squishy or lopsided. It keeps them all evenly spaced so that I can go through with my Dremel and cut them evenly. For the cutting, I am using a Dremel with a flex shaft attachment. It's just a Dremel 3000 basic model, not the lowest level, but not the highest either. On the end of the flex shaft, I am using a Cutsall spherical burr. Use the brass brush to keep it clean so it cuts cleanly and evenly. And I use the sphere. It's about a 1/4 inch across. And I start in the middle and I work my way out using the marks I had laid down as a guide. This kicks up a lot of sawdust, so you definitely want to use protection for your lungs. And there you have it. In case you're wondering, it takes me approximately 4 minutes to carve out one of these spirals when I'm really got a groove on. And so with 27 spirals per 8-foot board, well, you can do the math. I'm not fast, and this isn't an instant gratification project. Now you don't have to make every cut all the way deep as it's going to go on the first pass. It's best to make a light cut on the first pass and then come back and go deeper on the second. Also know that you don't have to get perfect. Once we finish the next step, the torching and wire brushing phase, a lot of the imperfections that you see in these power carvings here are not going to be noticeable. You're going to lose a lot of detail in the next step. So if you slip and make some extra gouges that you hadn't intended, don't worry about it. That's just going to add to the character later on. I get asked all the time, what kind of wood do you use for your trim when you're doing these routings and burnings and stuff? And I answered the cheapest softwood I can find. I've used hardwoods and the results are not satisfactory. Softwoods, this right here is spruce from Finland. Sometimes it's hard to find out specifically what kind of wood it is. When you look at the big box stores like Lowe's or Home Depot, they just have it marked as whitewood. This is spruce out of Finland. I've used pine. Western red cedar will work really good. Any type of softwood, the way they grow accepts the torching stage very well. They're usually more inexpensive than other types of wood. They will have pockets of resin along the grain lines on the growth rings, which does not take stain, and so you get a nice two-tone effect. But pretty much any type of softwood will work. Poplar is comparable in price to a lot of them, but poplar has a very fine grain. Poplar is a hardwood, and so when you torch and stain it, it's all very unified. It's very homogeneous, so you don't get a lot of dramatic textural or visual differences when you use this process. And oak and red oak and maple, a lot of them are a lot more expensive and just don't give the same dramatic results when you do carving and torching and wire brushing and all of that. Hardwoods just don't work very well, so stick with softwoods and you should be in good shape.
With the board fully carved out lengthwise with spirals, it's time for the next step, which is torching. Doing a burn over the surface, first of all, removes the rough feathering and fibrous particles from the softwood that comes up. And it also burns away some of the softer areas of the growth rings, leaving a textured grain surface, which is nice and gives the wood an aged look. It also highlights the color differences because of the way softwoods like pine grow. There are different colors. There's strong color differentiation in the growth rings, and this can accentuate that with darker, lighter patterns, which will pop.
With the entire length of our trim torched, the softer wood has carbonized more than the harder sections of the growth ring. So we're going to go over with a steel brush and simply scrub back and forth, and this will remove the heavily carbonized section, the soot, leaving undulating texture, which is really cool, and it kind of gives an aged appearance, makes it feel like the wood is really old. In the past, some have suggested that I accomplish this a lot more quickly using power tools like a drill with a wire brush on the end and scrub it back and forth. I've found that the power tools, even using like nylon attachments, are far too aggressive. It just strips away a lot of that texture and almost acts as a sanding mechanism. So this is the definition of elbow grease, but from my perspective, it works better than any of the alternatives. It gives better results.
Once all the soot is cleaned off
of the trim pieces. I'm going to go over them with Minwax walnut finish just because I like the effect it has. It brings out a richer color and it's consistent with the other trim pieces that I've already done, including baseboards. You can leave it raw wood. You can basically do whatever you want with it at this point. Once this is dried, I'm going to coat it with a couple of layers of polyurethane. I prefer satin for that kind of diffuse sheen, but you can basically finish it however you want. And the crown molding trim pieces are finished. I place them into position over the top of the Lauhala matting. I use the drill to drill pilot holes and insert screws to hold them to the studs behind the wall. And I'm using a stud finder here so that I may find the studs behind the wall on the angled section of the ceiling. I mark it with some masking tape. The vertical trim pieces that I'm going to install to cover up the seams where the two uneven Lauhala pieces meet is a bit of a challenge because Lauhala meets up at random places in the middle of the wall. There are no studs behind there for me to screw in and anchor the trim pieces to, unlike the baseboards and the crown molding above. So part of my solution is, one, I'm using wall anchors, drywall anchors. So I'm going to screw the screw in, drill the screw in through the wood, and then pull the molding away from the wall, and where the screw made the mark in the drywall, then I'm going to put the drywall anchor in and then re-screw it in. That way I know exactly where it's going to be and I can get it to line up perfectly. For the ends, however, I'm trying another trick. I've got simple 2-inch mending plates, little flat piece of metal designed to join two pieces of wood together. And what I've done is screw one end into the back of the trim. And this is going to allow me to slide it behind the baseboard and the crown molding above. Because these are anchored into the wall with screws, I can loosen the screw enough to pull the baseboard away from the wall and slip this behind it and then tighten it back up. Same thing with the crown molding. So ideally, that's going to anchor the two ends to the top and the bottom, while I use the drywall anchors to hold the middle end so we don't get any type of bowing or anything like that. Fingers crossed. Here I'm taking one of the vertical trim pieces with the mending plate tab on the top end, sliding it underneath the crown molding above, and using the drill with the pilot holes to drill into place, securing it to the studs that are framing the window. Okay, when I talk about Lauhala being uncooperative and difficult to work with, this is a case in point. This was supposed to be a rectangle. I measured it out, I double checked, I triple checked, I used a T-square, builder square, ruler measurements, and I cut precisely on the lines that I had marked out. Yeah, instead of getting a square, I got a rhombus. This is easily 2 inches out of whack. Lauhala just conforms to its own rules of space-time existence. It shifts around. It is just a fantastic looking wall covering, but it just does not want to cut straight or go where you want it to, so just be aware of that. Fortunately, Lauhala isn't very tough, and a run-of-the-mill pair of scissors can trim off the excess. I want to talk for a moment about the odd angles on the trim here. We have the pony wall, then a 45-degree ceiling and then a flat horizontal ceiling. And you're thinking, well, Jamie, what's so difficult about that? It's 45, so 45-degree angle plus 45-degree angle makes 90. And you just cut like that. Well, yes and no. If this was fine woodworking and you're doing furniture, a fine woodworker would make sure that all those angles match up and are very precise. This is carpentry, though. When houses are built, they're built relative to the other spaces, and angles are mostly approximate. So this isn't exactly a 45-degree angle. That's not exactly a 45-degree angle. So the way I dealt with that is, again, took some cardstock, which is a favorite of mine, and laid them up against the wall and made the cuts until I got a perfect match. Then I took these templates down to the garage with my table saw and marked out the angles. And actually I used my miter saw on this to cut them precisely. And that's how I came up with the precise measured angles on the cuts for these trim pieces, just so you know. When putting up Lauhala or back matting on your wall, there's one thing to be really, really certain to not skip or forget about, and that is applying flame retardant to the material. Back, Lauhala matting and others are dried, woven, fibrous plant material, and they really, really like to burn. When you apply the flame retardant, that helps reduce the risk of tragic accidents happening in your home tiki bar, whether it's indoors or outdoors. You don't want open flame coming in contact with it because it will act just like kindling. Once you apply flame stop to your back, it is highly resistant to fire. If you don't apply, it is no longer highly resistant to fire. In fact, it'll like nothing better than to burn. Yeah. So there are many different brands of flame retardant out there. Flame Stop, this is No Burn. There's all sorts of different brands. They all have the same basic principle. You spray it onto your back or Lauhala matting, let it soak in, and once it's fully soaked in and dried, then it offers a strong degree of chemical resistance to burning. And this stuff likes to burn.
One word of advice when getting your flame retardant: make sure whatever you eventually purchase has explicit description that it dries clear, because the one I got uses dissolved salts as part of its formula, and it left a whole lot of splotches all over my walls. So that's less than optimal. It's not a deal breaker, but there are better alternatives out there. So learn from my mistake.
It's nice when my ideas work out. The screws that I slitted holes to fit through the Lauhala offer solid purchase for the circular rattan shelves, and the L brackets likewise for the Whitgo hanging planter. Both of these items will keep the Lauhala matting pressed tightly against the wall and secure in place. Well, that was an adventure. I learned a lot by putting up this wall of Lauhala. Hopefully you did too. Lauhala hates to be square. Square is contrary to its nature. Also, you know, the type of flame retardant you use makes a difference. And finally, I think that we can agree that millions and millions of staples holding the Lauhala to the wall are not necessary. You know I have an aversion to staples. The nails along the edge combined with the retaining trim pieces, I believe are going to hold the Lauhala sheets in place very effectively. Plus the decor that I put on the wall, the nails plus the weight of the artworks, of the wall hangings, of the masks, those are all going to work to keep the Lauhala matting flush with the wall. And I don't think we're going to have any problem with it peeling off, falling off, dropping down, any of that. So I got one wall down, 3 more to go. Not looking forward to it, but you know, I think we're pretty much equipped for the rest of this ride. So if you're decking out your home tiki space with the hala matting, let me know how it goes. Let me know if you figure out any tips or tricks that might help me as I continue with this project. And until next time, from the Lagoon of Mystery, aloha.